So while this toucan barbet is up here keeping you all company, I'll just give you a quick overview of the presentation tonight. Over the next 90 minutes or so, I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour of the Ecuador Cloud Forests and the Galapagos Islands. As I was working through and preparing for this presentation, I realized what an immense challenge it was to talk about all those magnificent birds in a relatively short period of time. And so I asked for some feedback from my husband, Michael, about how I might shorten my presentation. And the advice I got was, or the observation he offered rather, was, for every bird that you present on or have a photograph of, we're averaging about 4 or 5 adjectives. So if you add that up over the course of about 200 photos. So at the beginning, I'm just going to get this out of my system. What follows is around 200 photos of the most spectacular, fabulous, wonderful, phenomenal, incredible, beautiful, outstanding, superlative birds. So I'm going to get all my adjectives out of my system as best I can up front and try to go through this at a reasonably speedy clip. So we booked originally with a company called BirdQuest for our trip to the Galapagos Islands, and it was going to leave in and out of Quito in Ecuador. And I thought it would be prudent to have a buffer day or two, just in case there were any snags with the travel. And then when I did research onto where we might stay in Ecuador for a night or two, that quickly, innocently enough, it began, but it quickly morphed into a 5-day photography tour at the Tandiapa Bird Lodge, which is about an hour or two outside of Ecuador. And that's where we saw this guy. This is the toucan barbet. This is actually the first bird that we saw as soon as we arrived at the lodge. And there was a trio of them singing to us and greeting us as we got ready and unloaded the car. And of course, I don't think I heard a word that they said during check-in because I was rather frantically trying to get my camera. My screen is paused here. Sorry, just let me see what's going on here I can't advance the slides. Let's just see. Oh, goodness. Now I'm completely frozen. Oh, there we go.
Oh,
okay. There we go. Okay. So this is the toucan barbet just from a different angle because he's beautiful from all angles. And these guys were during our stay at Tandiapa, we visited 3 other eco lodges, and this guy was quite easy to see at all of them. So a very friendly and pleasant bird. There were 2 species of barbet in Tandiapa, and this is the red-headed barbet. Our guide and I kind of developed a working theory that he may have been the inspiration for Angry Birds. I can't confirm that, but sure enough, his facial expression, these male red-headed barbets they never look like they're in a good mood, but they are a beautiful bird nonetheless. There's quite a lot of sexual dimorphism with this species. This is the female, also quite stunning. This was one of the highlights of the Tandiapa Bird Lodge. This is a crimson-rumped toucanet. There was a family of about 6 of them that lived near in and around the feeders right outside the lodge. And it was lovely to see them throughout the day on the feeders, patrolling the neighborhood. They were quite dominant and the other birds deferred to them. And as you can see from this photo, squirrels are a thing on bird feeders in Ecuador as well as they are here. And the feeder dynamics were quite fascinating to observe. The toucanet was a rather pleasant overlord. The squirrel was allowed a few moments every day to enjoy some banana and papaya bits. But as soon as the toucanet opened its bill, the squirrel skedaddled out of there. So they reached some sort of détente or arrangement. This is a Choco specialty in the area of Ecuador that we visited. This is the plate-billed mountain toucan. My nickname for this bird is actually, I call it the Christmas Eve toucan because the night before we were visiting the location where we would see this bird, I could not sleep. I was like a kid on Christmas Eve. I woke up, saw every hour on the clock. And so I was slightly sleep deprived when we saw him the next day, but beyond excited. What an absolutely gorgeous bird. The name is quite apt. I'm going to flip to the next slide just to show it's not a change in coloration on the bill. It actually is a separate plate that is on top of his original bill. So the red on the bill is a different color, but the name plate billed actually refers to that additional layer of keratin. This is a russet-backed Pendula. This was actually quite a pleasant surprise. On the lodge list, these were listed, I think, at about a 4 or a 5. And so they're a very infrequent visitor. We weren't expecting to see them at all. And then 5 of them showed up our first afternoon there and greeted us at the feeders for a few minutes. They made a very loud entrance and a very loud exit. Believe it or not, taxonomically, this bird's actually in the same family as our red-winged blackbird. So that's it's a neat fact. Of course, one of the highlights of birding in Central and South America is motmots, and this is a rufous motmot. It's I couldn't find consistent information on this as to whether it's the largest or the second largest motmot. Different sources say different things, but it's definitely one of the bigger of the 14 motmot species. We observed this guy both on the perches and on the feeders, and as well as on the ground. And what's interesting is that they always left food on the ground for the birds, but also they would attract agoutis, which is a rainforest mammal that we got to observe on a number of occasions. Very friendly little guys. So he'd be in there sharing the banana pieces with the motmot. Here's a close-up shot. You'll note the serrated edge on the bill as well. This is the Ecuadorian thrush. So this would be same family as our American robin. So Ecuador's version of that. There's many thrushes. This is another one, the glossy black thrush. We were quite happy to see this one. They're normally quite skulky and secretive, but when there's enough bananas on offer, they will make an appearance and come out and visit. So this guy flew in one afternoon to say hello. Very, very striking bird. Here we have the orange-bellied euphonia. These are quite tiny. They're actually not much larger than a chickadee, but they're quite delightful to see with their bright coloring. We saw 2 species. We saw a thick-billed as well. This is the male orange-bellied. This is the dusky chlorospingus with that striking red eye. Our nickname that we developed for him over the course of our stay was Spings. He was quite friendly with the hummingbirds. I wanted as well just to give you some context, because you're going to be, over the next hour and a half or so, absolutely inundated with bird photos. But I wanted, to the best that I could, give you a sense of what the Ecuadorian cloud forest looks like, which is difficult to do. I find, compared to birds, trees are rather difficult to photograph in the sense of capturing what they really look like. Whenever I'm looking at my tree photos, I'm always a little bit disappointed because they don't look or feel like the trees that I saw. But this gives you an idea of just the scale and the majesty of that forest. It was truly remarkable. The trees don't just look different, they feel different when it's that kind of rainforest. And so this just gives you a small glimpse of our surroundings as we birded for those 5 days. This was quite a special find. We took an alternate route back to the lodge after our second trip with our guide. And I wondered what we were doing at first. He pulled over to the side of a relatively busy road, and I thought, okay, maybe it's snack time, because there were a bunch of corner stores about. But then he got his scope out, and I thought, oh, okay, what's going on? And of course, he kept the suspense going right until the last minute. And then this is a lyre-tailed nightjar. And so if you look down to the bottom of the frame, that's the tail feathers going all the way down, a spectacular tail on this bird. There's a roosting pair sort of in the middle of, I won't call it an urban area because it's not, but there's a lot there. It's basically just like a street of sort of corner stores, or stores where you get provisions and whatnot. And this pair of nightjars roosts there and has for years. And so it's become quite a draw for birders to come by and get some refreshments and check out this marvelous bird. This is the Andean guan. I was so pleased to get some great photographs of this bird. My experience with guans up until this point is you might get a quick glimpse of them, or they'll pop out on a branch to say hello for a moment or two. This was photographed in the bird blind at the third lodge we visited on our trip, called Zora Loma. And it was quite a trek to get there. It was the highest elevation spot that we visited, and they had quite a neat bird blind. And this guan stopped by after we'd been hanging out there for about half an hour or so to say hello. The guest of honor, though, in the bird blind that day was definitely the russet-crowned antpitta. The russet-naped antpitta. So antpittas are notoriously skulky. You might hear one, but seeing one is incredibly difficult. They like to hang around on the ground in the forest understudy, and so it's usually quite dark and they're quite difficult to see. A lot of the eco-lodges in Central and South America have started to entice them out into the open by feeding them worms. And this one was no exception. So there you go. She's got a full mouthful of worms. There was just the one antpitta, so she had all the worms to herself. She seemed quite delighted. There were 2 antpitta species that could be seen at this lodge, but we had a difficult choice to make. It was a bit of a trek through the forest to see the second species. And of course, with an antpitta, you never know. Or you could remain back at the feeders. And so a bit of a risk. Michael went with the antpitta. I remained back. It paid off. He was able to see the second species, which is the chestnut-crowned antpitta. And this is actually a remarkably good photo of an antpitta. This gives you much more of a sense of what you're usually working with when you're trying to get a glimpse of them. I was rewarded for my decision as well, because as I stayed back, unbeknownst to me, it was bath time for the birds of that area. In some of the feeders and landscaping that they had set up at the lodge, rainwater would gather in some of the tree trunks and some of the crevices, and the birds would come by and bathe. And so these flower piercers started things off. This is two different species of flower piercer in the same shot. The black one on the left is the glossy flower piercer. And then the blue one on the right with that magnificent red eye is the masked flower piercer. Now, if you look at the really interesting bill shape on the glossy flower piercer, and their name gives you a sense of what they do for a food source. They will actually use their bill to pierce the base of a flower, and that's the way that they'll access the nectar. So you often will see these little guys cavorting with hummingbirds because they're after the same source of food. And interestingly enough, some hummingbirds, especially the shorter-billed varieties like thornbills, will use that as a method of feeding as well. Instead of accessing the nectar with their bill, by inserting it in the flower, they'll pierce the base. So they weren't interested in food when I was looking at them, though, for that little snatch of time. They were quite interested in bathing. Now, this photo is not really an accurate representation of what was going on because it looks like the birds were kissing. I assure you they were not. The bathtub was fiercely defended and fought over territory. And so the flower piercer was edged out by this rufous collared sparrow. I wanted to include a photo of this sparrow, though, in the presentation, as their range is rather broad. And one of the favorite games I like to play whenever we're traveling in South or Central America is to spot the rufous-crowned sparrow at the airport, because they're quite common and quite easy to see. So you can see them right here in the heart of the Andean Cloud Forest, as well as over in airports as well. So they are, for that reason alone, one of my favorite sparrows, aside from that absolutely gorgeous rufous crown around their neck. This was the bird that saved that day, because with Michael going to the forest to look for the second ant pit, if he were to be successful in that mission, it would render our life lists uneven and he'd have one more species than me. And as we've learned over the years, that's not good for our marriage. And so I was really happy when this scarlet-bellied mountain tanager showed up, because this was the first time in the trip that we'd seen this species. And so I was able to even things up and reestablish that equilibrium, which is really important the day before you're about to spend 10 days together in very close quarters on a catamaran. You want everyone to be in good spirits. Here we have the yellow-breasted brush finch. So this is the final contender for that bathtub. I've only taken you through a couple of those photos for about, I'd say 30 or 40 minutes. It was just one after the other bath time. It was quite a spectacle. So I am going to see if I can exit out of full screen now, and I'm going to shift into the next series of birds for Ecuador, which is the tanagers. And so this shot just gives you a sense of what the feeder setup at Tandayapa was like. This log that the birds are perched on is actually hollowed out, and that's where they put banana and papaya pieces. And this does give you, though, a pretty good sense of what the action was like at any given moment. And you could see this from the outside, but the lodge itself had these glorious large bay windows that you could just sit at from the inside while you were enjoying your meals as well and just watch the birds. Oops. Oh dear. Let's just see. I'm closed again. There we go. This is another shot of just the feeder setup and the golden tanagers. These were the most numerous and abundant of all the tanager species that we saw. This gives you an idea at any given time, there was quite a number of the golden tanagers. There was never just one of them. They were always in a group. But of course, there was sometimes danger at the feeder. This is a tyra. I may be mispronouncing that. It's spelled Tayra. It's a rainforest mammal that ranges from southern Mexico to the top half of South America. And this guy actually came by in the afternoon and toppled the entire feeder setup. So we had to go head out to the back deck and watch hummingbirds while things got set up. So it wasn't exactly a calamity or a crisis, because at Tandayapa there are birds in any direction. So the front of the lodge is more the tanagers and the toucans and the toucanettes, and then they have a large back deck which is full of hummingbird feeders. So there is always something to look at every minute of the day. That's just a more close shot of the golden tanager. This is actually called the scarlet-rumped tanager, but it's also referred to as the lemon-rumped tanager for obvious reasons, given the lemon coloring on the rump. And the color of its rump really depends on its range. It's one of those birds that has plumage ranges depending on, or plumage variation rather, depending on where in its range it is. So we've got just a really quick look at this guy. He wasn't a frequent visitor. This is the blue-gray tanager. So quite a widespread tanager throughout this region, and then all the way up in Costa Rica as well. In poor light, this bird is sometimes mistaken for this guy, the palm tanager. They size-wise and shape-wise, they're virtually identical, but their coloring is different. And then the palm's got the darker wings on the bottom half of the wings, and then it's a bit more of a gray-green color. But in good light, they're easy to distinguish. But if you're looking at them in the forest understory or under the canopy, sometimes you've got to look a little more closely to confirm which tanager is visiting you. This is the silver-throated tanager, which name is self-explanatory given that lovely silver throat, although I'm also a pretty big fan of those electric green wing bars as well. The colors on these birds is just spectacular. They light up the whole forest. This is the black-capped tanager. I think this might actually be the one and only photograph we got of this guy. He came by really quickly, just graced us with his presence for mere seconds, and then off he went. hopefully to get his toe looked at. If you look closely, his toe looks like it's been stubbed on a branch. There's a little sore, so hopefully he was okay. This is the barrel-spangled tanager. I'm going to linger on this one for a moment because it's Michael's favorite tanager. And that's a big deal for Michael, my husband. He's a very zen and pragmatic birder, unlike me, who has like a list of targets and gets pretty worked up and pretty excited. Michael is very much of the attitude, we'll see the birds that we see, it's all great. But in the weeks leading up to our trip, as our preparation sessions intensified, I started to hear more and more about this barrel-spangled tanager and the high hopes he had for it. So I know this bird holds a very special spot in his heart. I was thrilled that we got really good looks at it at the Choco Reserva, which is the first of the 3 eco lodges that we visited while staying at the Tandiapa Bird Lodge. It's just a wonderful tanager. And then, of course, I'm going to tell you about my favorite tanager. I mean, they all are, but this one, like especially, this is the flame-faced tanager. And this is one where it's another example where, depending on where you are in its range, some of the plumage may vary. So elsewhere in Ecuador, this guy's face is fire engine red. So it kind of depends on where you are, but it's got those 2 variations. This is the metallic green tanager. Again, you can just tell I'm just restraining myself with holding back on the adjectives. It's not easy. This is the blue-winged mountain tanager. So absolutely spectacular bird. A bit of a sad story with this one recently. It was featured in the BirdLife International publication. They had an article about the cage bird trade, and they've actually have data on which plumage colors and which feather colors are more likely to result in the birds being targeted. And this bird was discussed in that article because blue and yellow are actually quite popular colors. So it was nice to see him in the forest where he belongs. The blue-capped tanager, blue-capped mountain tanager, and I'd like to totally agree with the name blue-capped. It makes sense given that beautiful blue head, but you've also got to check out the yellow on his leg feathers. It looks like he's wearing yellow stockings. And so that was quite a highlight for us whenever he stopped by to check that out. Always a fun field mark to enjoy. Last but not least, the golden-naped tanager. So some spectacular blues to end things off on with the tanagers. I'm going to zip as quickly as I can now to hummingbirds. Oh yeah, got my good. Okay. So the hummingbirds, this is the booted racket tail, the 2 males. This is the bird that transformed my very prudent, I think we should arrive in Quito a day or 2 early, to we are staying at the Tandiapa Bird Lodge for 5 days. These hummingbirds are absolutely responsible for that decision. There's a video on YouTube, if you just type in Tandiapa Bird Lodge feeders, that shows you what their hummingbird feeders look like. And once I saw that, it was kind of game over. The booted racket-tail is probably the most numerous species that they have there. And what's not to love? You've got that remarkable tail. And then they basically look like they're wearing white pantaloons around their feet, like these giant puffballs right where their feet are. And they're everywhere at Tandiapa Bird Lodge. Like they're the most numerous hummingbird, and they're tiny little guys. They're really quite a small hummingbird, probably about the same size or only slightly larger than the wood stars. And they are fierce defenders of their territory and the feeders. So they're smaller, their diminutive size is not a disadvantage for them. They were just delightful to watch. That's the female, so she doesn't have the same tail, but she does have the what I'm going to scientifically refer to as the leg poof. This is the Andean emerald, so you can see the beautiful turquoise on the head is just catching the light there. Slightly larger hummingbird than the booted racket-tail. It was interesting to be at Tandiapa for several days in a row because you could get a really good sense of feeder dominance and which species were dominant and which weren't. Size was a factor, but it certainly wasn't determinative. It depended on many things, and there were lots of fierce battles. So you quickly realized just remarkable fighters hummingbirds can be when they're fighting over a food source. And there was plenty to go around. So they would either do aerial combat that we observed, or they'd sort of stagger their visits to the feeder by species. So that was interesting to get a sense of that. This is the purple-bibbed white-tip. So in the right light, a beautiful purple gorget, and then the most diagnostic field mark is that large tip on the tail. This was one of my favorite hummingbirds. This is the female fawn-breasted brilliant. This is one of probably the largest, or among the largest of the species of hummingbirds at Tandiapa. In total, I think they had between 23 and 25 hummingbird species that regularly visit the lodge. We saw over 20 in our time there, so it's possible to see quite a large number of hummingbird species. I loved this one because despite the size, rather gentle hummingbird. And so I didn't observe her bullying or messing with any of the other hummingbirds. She just sort of patiently waited her turn, and also was very nice to pose for me on this branch. This is the male fawn-breasted brilliant. You can see that electric pink throat patch, or I guess gorget when you're talking about hummingbirds. This is the buff-tailed coronet. I think I have more photos of this hummingbird than any other species. They were not shy. They landed on us numerous times. They were quite friendly, quite curious, quite gregarious, endless fun. They also have a smaller version of the leg poof. And you can see from this rather dramatic pose that this guy's striking, where they get the name from the buff tail coronet. So the buff coloring in the tail is what gives them that. These guys were quite dominant at the feeders at Tandiapa and elsewhere. This is the remarkable violet-tailed sylph. The name is self-explanatory. I was delighted to get this photo. It just shows all the wonderful splendor of this bird. Quite easy to see. It was delightful. It wasn't like we got one quick glimpse of this in the afternoon. They were there throughout the day in multiple locations, so we were quite lucky to get good looks at them. And another species where there's quite a lot of sexual dimorphism, which is quite common in hummingbirds, but this is perhaps a more extreme example. This is the female. So short tail and then completely different coloring on the breast with that orange tummy. This is a white-necked Jacobin. So these guys they were relatively frequent visitors, but just zipped in and out. So they didn't stay long. They just were all business. They came in, got their food and left. So a bit harder to photograph, but always delightful to see. This is the speckled hummingbird. I think unjustly described as a drab hummingbird in several of the field guides. I don't like using that adjective for birds. I think it's just more a question of having a subtler type of beauty. And I'm a pretty big fan of the pink feet on this one as well. Here we have the sun angel. You've got to love hummingbird species names. They're just endlessly amusing. So this one is catching the light in all the right ways. This was a crowd favorite, probably not surprising, the velvet purple coronet. When the light wasn't catching the feathers and getting that iridescence, it's a very dark looking hummingbird. But then when it catches the light, it's suddenly nature's disco ball. That's another photograph of the velvet purple coronet. This is the sapphire vented puffleg. And so, and another one of those, the pantaloon wearing hummingbirds, although not quite at the scale or extent of the booted racket tail. I've headed in now to the hummingbirds that we saw at Zurbrigg, which is the third of and final lodge that we visited. This was at the highest level of elevation. And it was remarkable because even with an hour or two's journey to a different place, the species of hummingbirds was almost entirely different. So you didn't have to go far in this area of Ecuador, and I think in Ecuador in general, to get a almost completely different slate of birds. This is the Tyrian metal tail. When you have a name like that and you're that hardcore, you need a nap every now and again. Hummingbirds, actually, given the extremes that they exist in terms of the constant fight for food, actually do spend quite a large amount of time roosting and resting to compensate for that. So I endlessly amused myself looking at napping hummingbirds, because with all the tree branches around, they would just perch in the open and have a little snooze. This is the mountain velvet breast. So this is the male. So you can notice the decurved bill. It's kind of got a hermit-like bill, and then named for that black velvet looking appearance on the bottom of the breast feathers. This is the same species, but the female. This is the buff-winged star frontlet, named for the buff patch on the back wing. Here we have the white-bellied wood star. And now you will often hear wood stars before you see them. They sound like a very loud and determined bumblebee. And so once you hear that sound, you'd look around and look for the teeniest, tiniest hummingbirds. They're quite small. These were among the smallest that we saw on our trip there. So this is the male with that gorgeous pink gorget, and then got the female as well. This is a lesser violet ear. So the violet ears, there are 3 species in total of violet ears that we saw. I'm just going to direct you to the ear feathers. They actually lift up. They're sort of not, I mean, conceptually similar to the tufted feathers in a great horn, where you've got the sort of tuft feathers that can move on their own. And that's the case with the ear patches on the violet ears. So this is the lesser. And then we've got the purple as well. So this photo, you can really see the prominence and the distinction of those ear patches that they can move. Turquoise is my favorite color, so I wasn't going to be able to limit myself to just one photograph of this bird. And it's an example too of the different areas, and might depend on the level of dominance you see. These were occasional visitors at Tandiapa. You could see them daily, but they weren't by all means frequent visitors. And yet they almost dominated in Zoraloma. So just an hour or two of travels can make quite a difference in those observations as well. This guy was kind of the star of the show. I mean, I love all hummingbirds, but my goodness. So this is the sword-billed hummingbird. This was the guy that I was thinking of when I faced my fear of the drive to get to Zoraloma. The roads in Ecuador overall weren't bad, but they weren't for the faint of heart or inflexible of spine, let's put it that way. I got through it thanks to a very ingenious solution by Michael when he realized, okay, this is going to be a challenge. Best to take away some sensory information. So I actually wore his sleep mask during the ride, and then he just grilled me about hummingbird ID questions, and that kept my brain occupied. But sometimes in life you have to face your fears for the things you love, and I'm glad I gritted my teeth through that to get to see this guy at the top, because he was unbelievably worth it. So the sword-billed hummingbird's bill is longer than its body. It has the longest bill to body ratio of any bird in the world. Its bill is so large and so substantial, it actually can't use it to preen. And so hummingbirds don't have particularly strong feet. They can perch, but they can't really walk very well. But this guy's feet have actually evolved a little bit differently, because he needs to use them to preen, because he can't use the bill for that purpose. And you'd think with a bill like that it might be, heavy, their heads might be hanging, but whenever they perched, it was proudly hoisted in the air. So this is a very typical pose for the sword-bills that we saw. So as you would expect with a bill like that, they're going to favor the flowers with the very long corolla, because they can access the nectar. The black-tailed train bearer, whose tail is so long, it's difficult to get it in one frame. So we had to zoom out. It was one of the amazing things about Ecuador is you're often zooming out to get the photos of hummingbirds rather than zooming in. But this, you can actually see the full splendor of the tail of the black-tailed train bearer. This is the collared Inca. So it looks like a fairly dramatic black and white hummingbird, but it's actually in the right light. It's got some beautiful emerald feathers as well. And then, of course, we've got the spotlight hogging buff-tailed cornet, who's found a creative way to maximize nectar from this flower. We'll just cling to the flower itself. And he's actually going to see us off to Galapagos now. When I saw that photograph, I thought, okay, that's the perfect one to end on. Off we go. So the tour group that we went with for our Galapagos trip is called Bird Quest. They are an outfit out of the UK. I can't say enough good things about them. We were quite impressed and quite pleased. But you need to know when you book a trip with Bird Quest that you are on a mission. So if you have any visions of a relaxed and leisurely approach to the days, let go of that. You are birding pretty much every possible minute. So that's why knowing that about BirdQuest, we took things relatively easy in Ecuador. There's numerous ways to see the Galapagos Islands. You can do what are called land-based tours, or you can do boat-based tours. We went with boat-based because, well, I really love boats. And also Genovesa, which is one of the northernmost Galapagos Islands, is bird mecca, and you can't get there on a land-based tour. You have to go via boat. So that was one of the major considerations. This is the boat we were on. It's a catamaran, the Nemo 3. It was fantastic. But we were also spending quite a bit of time on this, the Panga, P-A-N-J-A, or G-A rather, it's a Zodiac. So it gets you to and from where you need to go on the islands because you can't actually bring the boat all the way up to the shore. So the catamaran would anchor in one of the calmer bays, and then you take a short Panga ride and either do a wet landing or a dry landing. And a wet landing is just as it sounds. You kind of hoist yourself off the side and get wet up into your knees, and then walk onto shore. And usually with the assistance of a mockingbird or a sea lion, change your shoes. So right away we landed on Baltra Island. So we flew from Quito with a quick stopover in Guayaquil, and then landed on Baltra, which is the airstrip that was built in World War II. And you can even bird at the airport in the Galapagos. So we saw a small ground finch right away. It's one of the best places actually to see the land iguanas. And then shortly after unpacking and setting up on the catamaran, we were on our first official island trip to North Seymour, which is just about an hour or two sail from Baltra. And North Seymour, so they don't ease you into things. You go right in right away, is where there's one of the largest colonies of these guys, the blue-footed booby, one of my all-time favorite birds. There, I said it. And one of the iconic birds that's associated with the Galapagos Islands. So I selected this photograph because one of the ways to tell, to distinguish between the sexes in the blue-footed boobies is actually the eyes. And so if you look at the pupils, this is a male, and the pupils are really, you can tell they've got a clear, clean circumference. Whereas when you look at the pupils on the female, there's more coloring around in the iris area, and there's like an additional band of color on the outside of the pupil, and it kind of looks a little bit like broken glass, like it's radiating out. So that's one way to tell is the eyes. The other is the sound. The females honk and the males whistle. You can see if you look closely, there's a chick just poking out from under her tummy there. And it was just about to be feeding time. So I captured the whole sequence. And so this is the chick telling mom that it's hungry, it's feeding time. So you see tapping on the bill there. And she was happy to oblige. So regurgitated some fish for the chick. And just to give you a sense of my location as I'm shooting this, like this is happening right beside the path. The paths in the Galapagos where you're able to walk are very, very relatively narrow and pretty circumscribed. You can't just walk wherever you please. You have to stick to the path very, very carefully. But the birds don't know where the path is. And so they will set up their nests and feed wherever they see fit. So you've got to be careful and respectful. There we go, all done. That cycle actually repeated itself several times before the chick was sated. Here we have two blue-footed boobies in their famous courtship dance. And here we go, the mandatory showing off of the blue feet. So he's got some nesting material, and the health of the male actually determines how blue the feet are. So the bluer the feet, the better condition he's in. And so that's part of the reason why they kind of do their foot dances when attracting mates, is that they're advertising not only the beautiful color of their feet, but that's actually a signal of how they're doing health-wise. So important information for a prospective mate to know. You knew you were going to get a close-up of the feet. And you'll notice the band as well. Of course, all birds in the Galapagos are very closely monitored and tracked, although I'm happy to report that the number of boobies is actually stable. I know it's the scientific term, but I don't like using the term least concern. I think all species of birds should be of concern to us right now. But the birds, the three species of boobies that can be found in the Galapagos are all doing reasonably well. So there hasn't been any steep or sharp declines. So that's heartening information. Here we have a male, quite excited about the eggs that he's guarding. Got a protective toenail on one of them. And I just wanted to include this shot as a final one of the blue-footed booby, just to give you an idea of their nests. They nest on the ground. And that nest is it's a ring of poop, that is excrement. So that is how they delineate their nest. This is how they can nest when there aren't really that many or any predators to really concern them. So they're nesting out in the open. And it's absolutely marvelous to see. This is the second species of booby that we saw. This is the Nazca booby. They've got large colonies on Genovesa and Espanola Island. Like the blue-footed booby, they also nest on the ground. They were quite amorous, a lot of the Nazca boobies that we saw. They were in full courting mode, so it was quite common to see them preening one another along the trail. And this is a juvenile Nazca booby. This is the third species of booby that we saw. This is the red-footed booby. And so as you can see from this one, it's perching on a branch. These are able to perch, and they also, this species nests in trees and shrubs. So this was one of the draws for the boat-based tour, is that the largest colony of red-footed boobies is found on Genovesa Island. And they were everywhere. It was just absolutely remarkable to see their colony, and lots of them were nesting or gathering nest material. And there were quite a lot of juvenile red-footed boobies about. And so these guys, we did 2 stops on Genovesa. We did the one in the morning, which was basically you walk up Prince Philip's steps, is what they're called. The term steps is used somewhat loosely. It's quite a frantic clamber to the top of this cliff, but well worth the effort. And then we did a beach stop in Darwin Bay in the afternoon. And in between that, as we were sailing from one spot to the other, we were escorted by about a dozen of these juvenile red-footed boobies. And they were really just kind of getting a sense of themselves in terms of flying and perching and landing. And so they would actually, they landed on some of us. It was quite something. They escorted us as well on our snorkeling excursion. In between birding in the morning and the afternoon, we also got to go snorkeling on most days, which was remarkable. Genovesa is where we saw a school of hammerhead sharks, and a 7-footer swam right underneath Michael. So it's one of those moments where intellectually you know you're safe, but there's still that kind of visceral reaction when a shark goes right under your husband. Still, though, absolutely a beautiful sight to see. Here's a breeding red-footed booby on the nest. So you can see the facial skin is in full color, so it's a sign that they're in breeding mode. This is also a red-footed booby, but you'll notice the different color morphs. So there are white red-footed boobies and there are brown morph red-footed boobies. The brown morph is a lot more common, I think probably around 80% or so. You can see both relatively easily on Genovesa, but the red-footed boobies are a lot less numerous. This one's gathering up some nesting material. So the sequence is a little bit heartrending, but it's also my segue into the next species of bird I want to talk about. So bear with me. So here we have a red-footed booby who has spotted some nesting material that looks appealing. He's going to use this to try to attract and entice his mate, only to be foiled by a frigate bird. So the pirates of the sea, kleptoparasites, not only do they steal fish from a lot of the other birds, but they also take their nesting material because they're in competition for that too, as frigate birds are also stick nest builders. So this poor red-footed booby lost his branch to a frigate bird. But as I said, it does give me a segue now to talk about frigate birds. So there's two species of frigate bird in the Galapagos Island. We have the great frigate bird and the magnificent frigate bird. And I have to admit, I was a little bit skeptical when I was doing my research for the trip in terms of figuring out how to tell the two species apart. Because a lot of the material I consulted referred to the color of the eye ring on the female, and it's red in the great and blue in the magnificent. And I thought, on what planet am I getting close enough to a frigate bird where I'm going to see the eye ring? Because until then we'd seen them in Mexico, and they were these great creatures of the distant sky. The Galapagos, you do get that close to frigate birds. It was spellbinding. It was absolutely stunning. And so here we have a female great frigate bird. And you can see that powerful hooked bill. Here's a magnificent female frigate bird. There's both can be found on North Seymour, and then there's a huge colony of frigate birds on Genovesa, a lot more, if not exclusively, great frigate birds there. So the island will tell you, it might give you some clues as to which ones you're seeing. Here's the juvenile. And people who bird with me know that I've got a bit of a thing for bird feet. So I'm going to, of course, direct your attention to the really cool feet on this frigate bird. So here we have a male great frigate bird, and the females can be told apart by the color of their eye ring. With the males, it's the color of their feather sheen. And so from a distance, they look like they're all black, but when you get closer, their backs actually have different sheens to the dark feathers, depending on whether it's a great or a magnificent. So the easy way to remember it is great green, and then the magnificent is sort of a purpley burgundy sheen. So this one is a great frigate bird. This just gives you a sense of the landscape. As you're walking along the path, you see these frigate birds with their gular pouches inflated, and they're just dotting the landscape with that shock of color. And it's truly a spectacular sight. And it's not as though you see one every kilometer or so. Like, they are everywhere on Genovesa and on North Seymour. More on Genovesa. That's probably the most densely concentrated colony of frigate birds we saw on the whole trip. So as I mentioned a few moments ago, they're stick nest builders. So there's a sense of the nest. I found it difficult to restrain myself when including photographs of this species. They're just so absolutely stunning. I know from the perspective of other birds, they behave badly because their main method of getting food is kleptoparasitism. So they do torment the tropic birds and the boobies. And you see that in the sky somewhat often. They're absolutely gorgeous in their own right. This shot gives you a really good sense, I think, of that green feather sheen and what you're looking for in that color. I included this one as well, just because, I mean, looking at an inflated guller pouch on the frigate bird, I don't think it ever gets old, but you see that sharp bill, that pronounced hook, and that its proximity to the guller pouch, that made me a little bit nervous, because I thought, oh goodness, are they going to puncture themselves? But they obviously know what they're doing. But he's still in this photo, but they would rock back and forth and actually bounce off of their guller pouch. And it kind of like the way we'd use an exercise ball. It was remarkable to watch. And this just blew me away, but they flew sometimes with their guller pouch, either like somewhat like partially inflated. So they'd fly around with this guller pouch hanging down beneath them. It was something else. And so I've shown you the beautiful, aesthetically pleasing shots of frigate birds. Now I'm going to also portray them in, what their typical conduct. A frigate bird in action. This is a female frigate bird. This poor pelican. So we've got a pelican who's just been given a little treat from, this is taken near the fish market on Santa Cruz on our final day in the Galapagos. And this pelican's just gotten some fish. Got the juvenile pelican behind her, hoping she's going to share, besieged by a frigate bird. And then if you look in the upper right-hand corner, a sea lion's trying to get in on the action. So not an easy life for a pelican sometimes in the Galapagos, but they also do get a bit of a break. The fish market was quite an amazing spot to see pelicans up close. And you do not want to get in the way between a pelican and a fish. I tried not to, but they were so keen on the samples that were going to be given to them that one of them actually winged me out of the way. So quite something. I can say firsthand, as I immediately sprawled on all fours, pelicans have very powerful wings. So this is not a separate species of pelican. This is the brown pelican, but like many species of birds in the Galapagos, it's actually like a subspecies or a separate race. So it's sort of the Galapagos version of that bird. And this version of the brown pelican, or this race or subspecies, has that really pronounced chestnut coloring in the neck. And that's probably a good moment to pause and just talk about generally the rates of endemism in the Galapagos. And when I say that, I mean the rate of endemic birds. When a bird is endemic, it means it's unique or special to that area. You're not going to see it anywhere else. The Galapagos has exceptionally high rates of endemism. And so I think there are 65 birds that are resident breeding birds there. 33 of those are endemic. So that's almost a 50% rate of endemism, which is pretty extraordinary. And then of the non-endemic birds that are present there, a lot of them are the Galapagos race or subspecies of that bird. So there'll be some sort of differentiation, usually in plumage, that is associated with that bird. So this next part of the presentation is dedicated to Karen, because we're now on to the gulls. I know those are her favorite, and she's been patiently waiting in great suspense to have the reveal for the world's rarest gull. So here we go. This one isn't it, next one, but we're going to start things off with the swallow-tailed gull. So many people are of the view that this is the most beautiful gull in the world. I think it's a stunning gull. I personally am still rather partial to the ring-billed. I'm traditional that way. But this bird in flight, even though it's larger than a Sabine's gull, its wing pattern and the feathers is somewhat similar. It's different, though, in the sense that it's got this massive eye. And one of the reasons for that is that it's a nocturnal hunter. So it hunts at night, and it hunts largely squid. So this is a close-up shot of that really spectacular eye. And I thought a neat photograph of their tongue too. And then of course they've got that beautiful white blue tip on the bill. So the swallow-tailed gulls, a lot of them were in breeding or courtship mode. And so they were quite easy to observe, and they were in very good numbers on a number of the islands, and beautiful both on land and in flight. Very dramatic against the lava rocks. And of course, they're trying to catch a nap during the day, but any parent can probably relate to this shot of when you would just really like to sleep, and your chick is not going to allow that to happen. So mom was not waking up. I think that this one, she needed a rest. I included this photo because, well, I mean, you can't really ever have too many of an adorable gull chick, but just to give you a sense of how careful you had to be when you were walking. So we were, again, this is on Genovesa that this photograph was taken, and the paths were fairly well delineated. This was actually in Darwin Bay, so it was mostly beach, but you had to be so exceptionally careful where you walked because the birds were, of course, impervious to those boundaries, and they'll nest and they'll rest or stop anywhere. And so I didn't see anyone step on anything or during our trip. Everything was fine, but you always had to kind of have your wits about you, which is easier said than done when you're staring at these unbelievable sights at all times. So you kind of had to keep half a mind to make sure you weren't stepping anywhere you shouldn't be. But this little chick was unscathed and quite happily walking about the beach. So this is, just to be clear, this is a swallowtail gull chick. And this is the juvenile swallowtail gull. I think the juvenile plumage is just absolutely stunning. I mean, I'm probably, that this may be influenced by the fact that I'm looking at that and thinking charcoal drawing. I'm drawn to those gradations of gray and black and white, but very dramatic. And I loved the dark eye. It kind of reminded me of a teenager going through a bit of a goth phase. So very striking, dramatic gull. Here we go, Karen, world's rarest gull. This is the lava gull. And so you can debate where it got its name, whether the coloring helps it to camouflage against the lava rocks where it's often found, or whether when it opens its bill, the inside of its mouth is a bright red like molten lava. And so that could be a source as well. You can just see the tip of its bill here is that shocking red. It's the rarest gull in the world, referred to as such, not because it's particularly difficult to see. We actually watched one bathe in the hotel swimming pool, non-chlorinated or chemicalized, thankfully. But so these gulls are quite easy to spot in the Galapagos, but their numbers, because they are endemic, are extraordinarily small for a gull. So depending on the sources you consult, the rare the Birds of the World database has their numbers at somewhere between 800 and 1,000 in total. So that's where they get that distinction from. So very small numbers for a gull. It's a profile shot. So here we have a wedge-rumped storm petrel. You can just see him sort of taking off, see that white rump patch. I included this shot to show you their burrows. So this is Genovesa. This is our reward for clambering up the Prince Philip steps and getting to the top. There's about a 2-kilometer loop path that you can walk along. And the storm petrels, this is where their burrows are. And so they're there in extraordinarily large numbers. So that's what the skies look like in Genovesa. So you can see why this is such a critical destination for birders in the Galapagos. And many Galapagos tours don't include Genovesa because it is so far north. It was the second island we visited. Right after we wrapped up on North Seymour on our first day, we pretty much set sail right away. And I think it was somewhere between 10 and 14 hours to get there in relatively rough seas. But it's absolutely worth it. It's especially if you're interested in birds. Genovesa is an incredible island to visit. Now, when you have this many or numbers like this in terms of small storm petrels, you're going to have raptors. And so this is the Galapagos race of the short-eared owl. You can see its plumage is somewhat darker than ours that we are used to seeing here in Alberta. Somewhat surprisingly, and I think to our guide's chagrin, we actually didn't see one on Genovesa. We saw this fellow on Isabella Island several days later. So I think he was a bit nervous when we dipped on the short-eared in Genovesa, because that's where you usually see it. They snack on the storm petrels. I'm actually not sad that I didn't see that. We watched this one enjoy a mouse. So we stood on the roadside just for about half an hour or so, and we're got some incredibly good looks at this owl. There's 2 species of owl in Galapagos. The other is a barn owl. Back to storm petrels. This is the Elliott storm petrel. So the ballerinas of the sea. They are one member of the tube nose family, and they will scoop up zooplankton with their bill, and they'll just get a lot of their food from the surface of the water. So they'll just skim it. But as they're doing that, it looks like they're ballet dancing on the surface. It's just an absolutely beautiful sight. And so a rather difficult photograph to get. All the photographers on the trip were sort of elbows out, kneeling on the back of the boat, trying to hold still long enough to get a shot of these storm petrels doing their beautiful, graceful dances. This is Michael's shot. All of mine were blurry. That's one in flight. You can see in the profile there the tube nose. So there's 3 species of storm petrel that you can see on the Galapagos: the wedge-rumped, the band-tailed, and then the Elliots. These are brown noddies. So they're a member of the tern family. Very dramatic birds. They're easily seen alongside a lot of the cliffs, but then they're also frequenting the harbors as well. This was one of the first birds that I saw when we landed, when we were just boarding the Panga to take us to our, sounds lovely, to take us to our catamaran. It was not very many times you get to say that, but these guys are quite easy to spot and are there in relatively good numbers and quite fun to watch as well. They swoop very gracefully along the water in flight. There's one in some rather dramatic lighting. Lots of herons as well on the Galapagos Islands. So this is a sleeping yellow-crowned night heron who is just kind of snuggled up in the lava rocks on Genovesa and Darwin Bay. And this is the heron that's endemic to the Galapagos. This is the lava heron. Now, depending on which checklist you follow, some refer to it as the striated heron and don't separate it out as a separate species. But I think it deserves to be so. It's the lava heron and lives on the lava rock. And I won't digress too much on this, but can I just take a moment to express my enthusiasm for the working group that is going to work to consolidate and join all the different checklists together from a taxonomical standpoint. To be a fly on the wall in those meetings would be, I mean, Netflix has got to get in on that, because that would just be some interesting and rather heated discussions, I would imagine. So the lava heron, as its name suggests, is often found skulking among the lava rocks, feasting on crabs. So this is not the easiest heron to spot, because it is quite well camouflaged and blends in pretty well. But if you watch closely, you can usually see a few of them. Here's the juvenile in full heron crouch mode. And now, the waved albatross. So aside from a handful of these guys that nest on another tiny island off the coast of Ecuador, most of the world's population of the waved albatross resides on Española Island in the Galapagos. It gets its name, the waved albatross, from that gorgeous vermiculation on its breast and stomach feathers. And from April till December, they're in breeding mode and raising their young mode. And so when we were there in late May, there were quite a number of albatross on the top of the cliffs on Española that were on eggs or waiting for mates or finding mates. So they were there in relatively good numbers. It was absolutely extraordinary to be close to these magnificent birds. In every part of an albatross is extraordinary, but I am particularly partial to their special bills, the tube nose. Those deep, soulful albatross eyes. It was actually a little disconcerting how close we were to them, not by intention, but on Española particularly, the path is very narrow and very limited. You can't stray from it because you'll be right in their breeding territory. And yet some of their nests were either on or just immediately adjacent to the path. And it was you kind of held your breath as you were walking by these albatross so close. I was nervous that they were going to be distressed, but they seemed absolutely impervious to our presence. Many of them were napping. So they were very, very calm and relaxed albatross, except when they were trying to entice a mate. Then we heard the beak clacking and their calling as they were doing their albatross courtship rituals, which was extraordinary. And as I mentioned, a lot of them were on eggs. And so at one point, one got up to turn the egg and do a quick preen. Here's that. And you can really get a good sense in this photograph of the vermiculation and that gives this bird its name, the waved albatross. And here she is in majestic takeoff mode. And you can see just behind her on the cliffs a blue-footed booby. I have most of my shots in Espanola are, of course, of the albatross, but it's covered in seabirds. So there's lots of boobies, lots of gulls. It's really a remarkable and enchanting place. And in flight. Now, these last few shots of the albatross really shows you, just to give you a sense of how narrow that path was and the conundrum I faced as I worked my way back at the end of our time on Espanola. That sea lion is where I had to walk to get back. And so I faced the dilemma of close-up encounter with a sea lion versus getting way closer than I would have liked to the albatross. So I wasn't quite sure what to do. So sometimes the best thing to do is just sit still. And the sea lion came up to inspect me. He gave me a couple of good sniffs, decided I was not that interesting, and I was allowed to pass. So that's how I got myself out of that. Where there are so many seabirds and cliffs, you'll often see red-billed tropic birds. So here's a shot of one of those splendid creatures. And another raptor of the Galapagos, the only resident diurnal hawk there. This is the Galapagos hawk. It's actually taxonomically, or not taxonomically, ancestrally related to our Swainson's hawk. So a bit of an Alberta connection there to this wonderful raptor. And then another highlight, the Galapagos penguin. This one is molting. So this is an adult that we saw on the cliffs off of Fernandina, who's just face to the sun, drying off those feathers as she's going through a molt. And then I zoomed out a bit because where else in the world can you get a marine iguana right next to a penguin? That's the magic of the Galapagos right there. This is the flightless cormorant. So this is the largest of the cormorant species. And you can see those big, powerful legs that have evolved. This cormorant dives more deeply than any of the other cormorants, but over time has lost the ability to fly. So this is a juvenile. As you can tell, the eyes are dark. Otherwise, when they're adults, they have bright emerald eyes. This photo just shows at any given time in the Galapagos, you are choosing what you are going to photograph, and there's always plentiful options. And so these are fur seals, Galapagos fur seals, juveniles. There's that cormorant. You can see the vestigial wings there, and those powerful diving legs, and then the obligatory wing shot. And that's actually going to transition us out into the next little mini slideshow I have, which is all about the finches. So I'm going to give an obligatory caveat at the beginning of this because finch identification in the Galapagos is not always straightforward. There's the H word, hybridizing. So I've started with those that I'm relatively certain of. There's 18 species of finch that are known as the Darwin's finches. 17 are resident in the Galapagos. 14 live on the islands that are accessible to tourists. Unless your name is David Attenborough or you are a researcher, you're not going to be able to see the other 3. So we were on a mission to get all 14, and I'll kill the suspense. We did. But it took some doing. So this is the first finch. This is in the slideshow, this is the vegetarian finch. This is the largest of the Galapagos finches, and it's got that somewhat stubby parrot-like bill. This is the woodpecker finch, quite a famous finch because it is known for using cactus spines as tools to dig insect larvae out of tree branches. So this one's got that beautiful thick bill. It's black, so that means it's in breeding mode. Another shot of that woodpecker finch inspecting some insect larvae. This is a warbler finch. There's two species of warbler finch on the Galapagos, the green warbler finch and the gray warbler finch. Neither is particularly green or gray, so that adds an additional layer of fun to the identification, and sometimes they co-occur on the same island. This one is a gray, and this one is a green, as you can tell by the buffy coloring. That's the buffy coloring is actually one of the signals for that. And then there's a difference in colorations in the bills as well. So these guys get their name from that warbler-like bill that they've got. And then the cactus finches, there's been a number of developments taxonomically with the cactus finches. It used to be common cactus and large cactus, and that's recently changed. This is now the Genovesa cactus finch. So there we go. That shows you cactus finch doing what cactus finches do. So they've got that larger but elongated bill. Now, the fact that the finch is on a cactus doesn't mean that it's a cactus finch. Lots of ground finches are seen on cacti quite regularly. But this one by the bill and it's on Genovesa as well is Genovesa cactus finch. Genovesa also got its own sharp-billed ground finch relatively recently. And so this is the male. And this is not to be outdone by Genovesa. This is the Espanola ground finch. So it was for a time Espanola cactus finch, but then genetically was found to be more closely related to ground finches. So this is the Espanola ground finch. Basically, if you're on Espanola and you see a large-billed finch, you're probably looking, or rather almost certainly looking at an Espanola ground finch. So now we've got the ground finches, the more traditional small, medium, and large variety. There is quite a lot of variation with these. And so this is an example of a small ground finch, but again, they do hybridize. So this is a male, it's all black. And then it's not based on the bill, tells you whether they're breeding or not. Black bill generally means breeding. This is a small ground finch by the pronounced gape, like a juvenile. Another small ground finch. I just wanted to give you a sense of the plumage variation as well as the variation in bill color with these. So now we move to a median ground finch. We saw finches on pretty much every island we visited, but it was really on the last day or so when we were on Santa Cruz and we'd gotten off the boat and had moved to the land tour for the last day or so that we saw a lot of the finches, which also meant the heat was on because it was see them now if we hadn't seen them yet or don't see them. So in our tour group, we had some quite established listers, some members of the 9,000 club. So rarefied air up there, so you could kind of feel the tension as we were trying to get all the finches for our lists. It's a female medium ground finch. And then I'm just going to prepare you for the next blitz of large ground finches. I love all the birds in the Galapagos. This is probably my favorite. So I really had to try to restrain myself with the number of photos, but I adore this finch. I cannot get enough of this finch. So there's probably more photos of this than there are of anything else. So bear with me. This is the large ground finch. Pretty much all of these shots are from Genovesa, where we were treated to close views of quite a number of them. They were very, very confiding and curious. There it is, doing what made them famous, cracking those large seeds with those miraculously large bills. Yeah, I could not include that shot. I mean, my goodness, look at that beautiful bird. You wonder when you see, like, how am I going to be able to tell between a medium and a large ground finch? And then you see the large ground finch's bill and you say, oh, okay, there we go. So it's got that very pronounced large culmen, and then it goes up well past its forehead. So I'm rounding off on the finches here. So this is the last but not least, the tree finch. This is a small tree finch. We've got that black hood. And you can see the bill is shorter and stubbier on the tree finches. Whether they're on a tree or not is not always helpful. There were lots of ground finches in trees. Medium tree finch. And then you wait your entire life for photos like this. Look at that. This is the large tree finch. This one we fought for 6 hours in the rain. And with 10 minutes of daylight left, our guide, I think, called in a personal favor and got us on some private land of a friend who had seen one recently. And oh my goodness, the suspense, but we got him. I'm going to move now to mockingbirds and other land birds rather quickly. And so there's 4 species of mockingbird in the Galapagos, a lot easier to distinguish than finches because all you need to know is which island you're on. So this is the Galapagos mockingbird. And this is the most common mockingbird in the Galapagos. There's 6 subspecies. This one was photographed on Genovesa. They're endlessly entertaining, these mockingbirds. This one is the San Cristobal mockingbird. So it's got a slightly brownish wash to the face, and then the breast and tummy area is more intermediate plumage, so a bit lighter. This is probably the most famous one. This is the Espanola. These guys are unbelievably tame. And there's a couple of things that are notable about them. Firstly, the bill is the longest of all the species of mockingbirds. It's got that red eye, and it's also believed, scientists are starting to think it's going to be the next flightless bird in the Galapagos. It's starting to use its flight powers a lot less. It kind of accompanies you much like a determined and small gray roadrunner when you're there, and they just sort of hop along beside you. They're into your camera, they're landing on your bag, so they're very friendly. And they eat these. This is the Galapagos centipede, so not commonly seen. We saw this one rather unusually strolling along the beach, but I'm not kidding. The mockingbirds actually eat these and feed them to their young. Don't know if they rip the legs off first as a courtesy, but here we have the Galapagos centipede. And then the rarest of the mockingbirds, you can only see this one from a boat. So we're sort of in the panga first thing in the morning. This is the Floriana mockingbird, which you can be viewed off of Champion Island, usually seen on top of a cactus. If you're lucky, one will bounce down to the rocks and you'll get a better look. And you can see this one's double banded. And then from a field mark standpoint, it's got that patch on the chest. This is the Galapagos flycatcher. And then we've got the Galapagos dove, an absolutely beautiful dove. It's got that gorgeous patch of iridescence on the throat, which can be pink or gold or green. And of course, that beautiful blue eye ring. This is the mangrove warbler in the Galapagos, and so only warbler that's resident, I believe, and tons of plumage variation on this one. Looks a lot like our yellow warbler, only it's got that red cap. And unlike our warbler, very easy to photograph at eye level, very friendly. This one was checking us out as we were patiently waiting for the paint-billed crake to make an appearance. He's kind of looking at us going, what are you guys all doing standing there in raincoats for 2 hours at a time? This is what we were doing. So I got some other landscape photos as we were waiting for this guy to make an appearance. So for the plant lovers, here's some Galapagos hydrangea and a painted lady butterfly. And then while all of these shots were taken, we did a hike of the Sierra Negra volcano on Isabella Island. It's about an 8-kilometer hike. It's lovely. And lots of interesting things to see on the way, including this Darwin's flycatcher. And so this is split from the vermilion flycatcher. It's somewhat similar, although the females look quite a bit different, but the males are that same glowing red. Unfortunately, the numbers of this bird are declining rather steeply, so they are difficult to see. They've been struggling with the fruit fly that's evolved to predate on their eggs and their young. That's the Caldura at the top of Isabella, or at the top of Sierra Negra. Some Galapagos flamingos. These guys were in a swamp at the base of Isabella. Black-necked stilt. I have not done anything to that photograph to alter the color of the water. It's what it actually looked like. And then the one resident duck of the Galapagos, not endemic. This is the white-cheeked pintail. It can be seen elsewhere as well, but there's a decent number of them on the Galapagos. And those green scapular feathers are obviously something to write home about. This is a beautiful, beautiful duck. And then the Galapagos martin. So this is an endemic. It's closely related to the purple martin that we have here. Quite a bit more difficult to see. We were up in the Pangas at 5 a.m. Trying to get glimpses of these guys in the cliff. And you can just see in the middle, the juvenile's poking his head out there. Here's a closer shot. You can see the juvenile with that lighter bill and that pronounced gape, and then the male on the right there. And then the final bird of the Galapagos that I've got is the dark-billed cuckoo. And this friendly fellow was feeling very sorry for all of us, traipsing through the rain, trying to get the large tree finch. And so he behaved in a very uncuckoo-like manner and sat in an open branch for a while to console us during those struggles. So we're forever grateful for that. And then I'm all about the birds, but in Galapagos, there's just so many remarkable creatures to see as well. So I would be remiss if I didn't at least give you a quick whirlwind overview of some of the other wonders that we encountered. This is a male sea lion. When one of these comes clambering towards you, it's really gets that heart rate up, but they weren't in breeding mode, so you're relatively safe. This is a beach on Santa Fe Island. So just sea lions galore, and they were so friendly. This photograph kind of hit home after a week of being very well fed. The food, both at the Tandiapa Bird Lodge and on the boat, was incredible. So I was really relating to these sea lions by about day 10 of our trip. This is one of the land iguanas. So this was photographed on North Seymour, but they're actually introduced there, or being introduced there, to address declining numbers. So this guy looks like he's had enough for one day. This is another species of land iguana that you can see on Santa Fe. It's a lot lighter in color. This was one of the last photographs I took. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation on Galapagos, one of the best places to see the land iguana is actually at the airport. So where else can you see a creature as majestic as this just before you board a plane? There's lava lizards on every island in the Galapagos, and they all have different colors depending on which island you're on. And so I've got just a small sampling here. I called this my guardian angel lava lizard. This is the female on Espanola. She was right by my side the entire time during that somewhat precarious rocky hike. And so I felt a lot better having her there to guide me. This is the male Espanola lava lizard. This is the Santa Fe lava lizard. I believe that's the male. And this is the Floriana lava lizard. So these guys are fun to collect as you go along. This is what it looks like on Fernandina. This is the marine iguanas, the only species of iguana in the world that is a true marine iguana. So it feeds underwater on algae. And Fernandina is carpeted with these guys, and they will not move. They're not aggressive. They're not going to bite you or harm you or anything, but they were there first. You're on their turf, and you are kind of picking your way over them. They're everywhere. So it's just an extraordinary sight. And to see these guys, even more extraordinary is to see them in the water. So as I said, they are marine iguanas, and we got on our last snorkeling trip, we got the pleasure of snorkeling with them, which was just truly remarkable. They'd eat the algae underneath the water and then swim up and break the surface, and you'd go up and you would just feel like you were surrounded by dinosaurs. It was an incredible sight. As was this. This is not usual at all. There are 3 species of snakes in the Galapagos, but they're difficult to see. And our guide had actually never seen this. This is a snake slithering over a marine iguana. Usually you see the snakes when it's the iguana breeding time, and the snakes will predate their eggs. But this snake was just out for a slither on a sunny day. And like us, you have to go over the marine iguanas because they're not moving for you. This is one of the marine iguanas on Espanola. They're sometimes called the Christmas iguana because they've got red and green coloring. So all of them are beautiful, but their coloring does differ depending on the islands. And this one is often a favorite because it's fairly bright. This is my favorite shot of the whole trip. This is Galapagos this is the essence of Galapagos: marine iguanas, mockingbird. That was on Espanola. And then this is what most of the lava rocks look like. They are covered with Sally Lightfoot crabs. So very bright and remarkable crab. The bright red ones are the fully grown adults. You can see if you look closely a smaller black crab. So they're dark when they're juveniles, and then they lighten and brighten as they age, just like we do. So here's a close-up of one feeding. And this just gives you an idea of the variations on the size and shell as they're at various stages of their growth and development. I wish I had a scientific explanation for this, but I don't. I've done some research, even consulted my Crabs of the World book, but no idea why he's squirting water out of his nose, but I sure am glad Michael got that photograph. And then I'm going to end with adjectives even escape me with these guys. These are the giant Galapagos tortoises. We were lucky to see them on 3 different islands. 2 were at breeding centers, and 1 when they were roaming in the wild. And so they eat these apples, which are quite poisonous to people. There's signs everywhere not to even touch the leaves because they'll give you instant blisters. And just look at that face. No sound was coming out when this just expressing himself silently, like a silent movie star. And there's some younger guys at one of the breeding centers kind of squaring off. This is a female. The females and the males are quite a bit different in size. The males are tremendously large. And I mean, the females for a tortoise are large as well, but about half or a third of the size of the males. I had to get a close-up of the foot. And then this is my final photo, just to give you a sense of the tortoise in all of its majesty. We were so lucky to be able to walk around with them on our final day there and watch them roam free in the wild. It was truly tremendous. So I will thank you for your patience. I made it in just under an hour and a half.